Hello, and welcome to Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents, a conversation with John Gilstrap. Unlike previous episodes, I'm not going to go through a long introduction just because it would take most of the podcast and we wouldn't have time to talk with John. I will say that he is a longtime best-selling thriller novelist. He has written 24 books, and his latest series, he has 2 series in the works. He has the Jonathan Graves series, of which the latest is Stealth Attack, which came out a few months ago. And he has another one, Lethal Game, coming out in June of next year. He also has, for a change of pace, instead of straight thriller, he has what you may call a post-apocalyptic series, although we'll get into the terms for that, starring Victoria Emerson, of which there are 2 books, one out now called Crimson Pheonix, and the other one that is coming out in February called Blue Fire. And I'm really looking forward to this. I've followed John's career for many years, and I have a chance to talk with him. John, thank you for showing up.
And I have a chance to talk to you. What a great day.
Absolutely. And you just said you finished a book, didn't you?
I did. That one is going to be called, you just said it, Lethal Game. It was going to be a different title, and I wrote it under a different title, and we had to change it at the last minute. So now it's Lethal Game. So if I call it something else, it's not a brain incident. It's me getting confused. Yes, absolutely.
Well, we'll stick with Lethal Game because I saw that as well, and I was trying to figure it out yesterday. Is this the same book? Is this so? How long did it take you to work on this particular one, Lethal Game?
Well, Lethal Game. Well, there's work on it, and then there's work on it. So it's the next plot is always kind of knocking around the back of my head, but I had to finish Blue Fire. And then once that was in the can sometime, I don't know, in April or May, then I started working seriously on Lethal Game. And I will start up, the next White Smoke will be the next book in the Victoria Emerson series. And I have to get that to them, I think, by June 15th. So I got some time.
Yeah. So you just finished. So it's like you just got out of school. It's summer vacation, and you have this long period of time ahead for you to do what you want to do.
And it's the holidays, and I'm moving, and it's just and there's what I do for a living. I make stuff up, so it's very intense as deadlines approach, and it gets so intense that when the deadline is finally hit, and then I click send, it's almost like you want to float out of the chair. It's there's literally nothing to do right then, and that's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, at this point, in the few days running up to this, you're in the revision stage. Does the story seem fresh to you, or does it feel like, I remember Lawrence Block calling it washing garbage?
No, I've always been pretty good about compartmentalizing the story and being able to go back and look at it. The stuff that I wrote, when the deadline is approaching, I'll do 15 or 20,000 words in 2 weeks coming up. So that's a little too fresh and there'll be a lot of typos and such that I miss. That's why we have editors. Among a number of reasons we have editors. But my process, I hate that word, but I start every writing session by rewriting what I wrote the day before. So by the time I get to the end of the first draft, it's probably more like a 12th or 13th draft. So at that point, I can go back and change some stuff, but it's usually not huge rewrites at that point.
Yeah. And this is going to be your 14th book in the Jonathan Graves series,
right?
Which is about a hostage rescue company starring with Jonathan at the head. And each book is essentially, it's a standalone, right? You can read this in any sequence whatsoever. So you can pick up the latest book.
There are Easter eggs. You got to respect the readers who are with you for each step along the way. So there are Easter eggs and fourth level stories that have a continuation through the books. It's not something that would ever confuse a new reader, but it gives a warm spot to some of the folks who've been around for a long time.
Yeah. Well, it's like also here, which involves a Mexican drug cartel. There's a reference in here to previous times they've unexpected, they've been hit before, and I think they don't realize it's Graves' operation. But if you read something like Scorpion Strike, you go, oh, it's from that book.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you want to go over the cast, you might say, for the Jonathan Graves series, and what the characters like, because the characters are very strong and they interact with each other in a way almost like you'd find in Star Trek in a way. They're distinctive types.
Wait, thank you. And nobody's ever actually invoked Star Trek, but I see.
I have a reason for that too. I'll tell you in a moment. Okay. Go ahead.
Jonathan Grave and his longtime friend and coworker, Boxer, he's Brian Van de Meulebrocki is his real name, but he goes by Boxers. And Jonathan's call sign is Scorpion. And they were special operators together. They were part of Delta Force, which calls itself the unit. And they left the Army before retirement for reasons that I know what it is, but I've never had the opportunity to reveal it in a book yet. So there's something that can be out there. They have a team. Jonathan is fabulously wealthy because his father was a criminal. His father is serving a life sentence in a supermax prison, has never been on camera, as it were. But Jonathan is, he's a billionaire. He lives in Fisherman's Cove, Virginia, which isn't a real place. And with his team, there's also Venice Alexander. And Venice, spelled Venice, but she got all haughty in her teen years and decided she wanted to be Venice. She is a computer genius. She's a hacker extraordinaire. In fact, her hacker name is Freakface666. And she can just do remarkable things with the computer universe. And then there's Gail Bonneville, who appeared in the first book as Jonathan's nemesis. No Mercy, No Mercy opens up with a rescue of a kidnapped boy in Indiana that goes bad. And Jonathan ends up leaving some bodies behind because they wouldn't put their guns down. So what Gail Bonneville, she was the sheriff of Sampson, Indiana, and she sees homicides, not rescues. So she ends up being his nemesis in the first book. And they had this mutual admiration society that turns into on again, off again romance. And then there are the walk-ons. I spent 15, 16 years in the fire and rescue service, which has big personalities who work in dangerous circumstances with wonderful, dark sense of humor. And I don't know, all of that just kind of resonates in my head of people who are so committed to their cause that everything else goes secondary. Jonathan, if Jonathan takes on your case to go and rescue your loved one's coming home. Yeah. And they're certainly not coming home without it.
Well, that's the kind of, you mentioned fire and rescue, those people who are, they do dangerous work. They do very stressful work. I wonder if, the personalities come out because they can afford to be, because what are you going to do? Fire them? Do you really want to have somebody not working there, putting out fires for you? And that makes it more useful for the fiction writer because, of course, you want vibrant characters like Boxer to come out. And the Star Trek reference, actually, because I do a lot of thinking about writing, is involving cast families. And one of the most popular ones is, of course, Kirk, Spock, and Bones, where Spock is logic, Bones is emotion, Kirk is action, might be the best way to put it. And there is a scene in Stealth Attack during the rescue operation on essentially a child brothel, roughly in the middle of the book. I don't know how much detail we want to go into this, but it is there. I notice you handle that scene very sensitively because it's the kind of thing that would be very exploitative in terms of violence. You're not doing Saw-like movies, but it's still deeply uncomfortable. But the thing is also with Boxer, he is the Jiminy Cricket of the outfit because he's advocating a certain type of, even though he's saying, we got to kill these people. These are horrible, horrible people. And Jonathan's the one saying, no, they're the Johns of the we're going to leave them live. And he's advocating a moral position that is akin to Bones McCoy, except that this is a 7-foot guy who is heavily armed and is very good at killing people. It amused me very much to see him in that role.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that scene. That was it, and it's the cartels are really, really nasty people, and they do really nasty things. And this was one of those. And you're right; it's an underage brothel. And while they're breaking it up, people do die in this process. But if you recall from the book, there is a horrible after effect, because Jonathan and Boxers and his team go in and shoot people up, and then they leave. But now the community has to deal with the aftermath of what just happened, because the cartels are still going to be there. Mm-hmm. So, that was kind of an interesting, I thought it was talking about my own books being interesting. But I thought it was an interesting moral dilemma, because actions have consequences that aren't always good. And even good actions can have very negative consequences. And those decisions can be really hard to make.
Yeah. And it's that kind of moral calculation that I think it sets your books apart, because there's other things that you can think about while you're indulging in the action. And there is plenty of action. There's plenty of great description. There's plenty of fascinating details that are in the same way as Tom Clancy, except that you're not taking 3 pages to detail, even the whole thing. And as a matter of fact, the child brothel stuff, or the stuff that the cartels, how are you overemphasizing it for dramatic purposes, or is that what you're looking at, or are you saying I'm actually toning it down? Because I know you did research.
Yes, I did do research, and the specific events and locations and all of that, I don't know where these things are, right? Yeah. But I know a number of folks. One of the nice things about writing what I write is I get to meet a lot of the people who do things that are very similar to what Jonathan and Boxers and their team does. And yeah, I mean, these things exist. It was just, the cartels just, yesterday told people they shouldn't vacation in Mexico because the shooting war is coming. They're coming across the Rio Grande and they snatch people from here and take them there to, across the border. It's not common, but it's not uncommon that young people who are at these, or people in general, young people or rich people who are at these seaside resorts, which are enclosed enclaves, right? And they wander off to see the sights, and bad stuff happens, and it happens more routinely than anybody would think is normal.
Yeah, well, and we live in such a relatively safe society in America. Right. And it's not just Mexico. I mean, we've seen, Instagrammers who are going across, the top of Africa through Libya and Egypt, and they end up disappearing because you're in a place where you don't have a support network. They don't know you. You're a target.
Well, and there are great swaths of this world where in America we like to think the humans are at the top of the food chain, and there are justice systems in place and all that. You go to other parts where you're in the middle of the food chain, and the other predators are other humans. And it's scary. People, we're very lucky, you and I, to live where we live.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's also something about your books as well that you deliberately de-emphasize cursing. Is that a good way to put it? Even though these are people who are rough men, rough women engaged in a rough business, and yet, they're very pristine in their language. But
they're not pristine. They cuss. They don't use the big ones. The F-bomb. I haven't written an F-bomb in 10 years, I guess. And here's why. I mean, there's a very specific reason for this. I've come to realize over 24 books that I'm in the entertainment business. People read my books to be entertained. And entertainment also means the blood is rushing, the heart is beating fast, and you have that tension that always, in my books, I won't say I always have happy endings, but I like to think I always have satisfying endings. And there are a lot more people than I thought, actually, who are truly offended by that word, by the F word. And I received dozens of, maybe 100 letters and emails over the years saying, I love your books, but I can't give it to my mother. I can't give it to my kid. I can't do it, all these, because the language is so rough. So I thought, okay, that's fair. I use the F-bomb as every part of speech in my personal life. I stepped on a slug one time when my son was little, and he learned a whole new vocabulary. I was barefoot. But anyway, so I went, and not only do I not use that word now for my early books, specifically Nathan's Run, excuse me, which is my first book. The star of the show is a 12-year-old boy, and he runs away from a juvenile detention center after killing a guard, and that's the story is much more than that, but that's where it goes. And oh my goodness, it was one of the 100 most banned books in schools because it has the 12-year-old protagonist. The American Library Association awarded it with the Alex Award, which is the best adult market fiction for young adult readers. So it went into junior high schools all over the country. And oh my goodness, it just, it exploded. And it ultimately, it ended up, I live in Fairfax County, Virginia, and the Fairfax County School Board was being spoken to by a group called PABIS, which is Parents Against Bad Books in Schools. Mm-hmm. And they're book burners. And mine, I lived there, right? And mine was one of the ones that they were trying to get. And this is a true story, I swear. I went up when it was my turn. I got on the speakers list. I went up and I proposed the formation of a group called CRAP, Caring Readers Against Piss Parents. Of the two of us, one of us got a standing ovation. But so I actually went back and I'll go ahead and say it here because there's no other way to do it. I call it the great defuckification of my books. When the rights reverted back to me for Nathan's Run and At All Costs, my first two books, I didn't rewrite the stories. I just dropped out that word. Mm-hmm. Jonathan and Boxers don't use that word. And I have never received, I shouldn't say this because now it'll come, right? But I have never received a single complaint letter that says the dialogue seems too clean or that it doesn't seem realistic. That just doesn't happen. So, and there are buyers for some major chains. This is true too. There are thriller buyers for some of the major chain stores that really don't like that word too. So, why not?
It's not the point of the books anyway.
Right.
And
right.
it's not like you're censoring actual information. This is just music, wrong, a power chord from a heavy metal death band, but that's the equivalent of it. And you don't write that otherwise. So, that's very understandable. And, you're an author, but you're also a businessman, right. And I am too. And it's one thing when you start thinking about this as a business and you're writing as a professional, fulfilling contracts, giving speeches, giving people value for money, then those calculations have to come into play. I mean, if you want to be in business.
And I'm an entertainer. That's what it's about. My job is to make people's lives easier, more entertaining. And going back to that whole brothel scene, just in case I turn people off, there are lines there that I don't cross. There are things that will never happen on screen in my book. Sometimes people think they have read something like that, but it's their imagination running out. It's not what I put in because it just, who wants to read that? It's
Yeah, absolutely. I've read the scene and it's distinctly uncomfortable, but it should be uncomfortable. You should be feeling uncomfortable about a child brothel, and you should be rooting for Jonathan and his crew, torching it. I was just reading a memoir by Russell T. Davies, who was the showrunner for Doctor Who, and he talked about the writer's job being to say something about the world. And it's always that calculation between saying something about the world and entertaining readers. And particularly when we get to the Victoria Emerson, there are things being said in there, particularly about politicians and how they got the world into the mess that Victoria finds herself in.
You're talking about the Victoria books, but I want to go back to the Jonathan thing just very briefly, because if there's one part of Jonathan that is truly autobiographical, is that he has zero time for politicians and bureaucrats. He just can't stand them. I'm kind of there. Obviously, there are good ones, right? The ones that do the things you want them to do, I guess. So it's all relative. In this case, where the basic premise of the Victoria Emerson series is that, and this is based on truth, that in the event of a nuclear war, members of the House and Senate are to be evacuated to a bunker for the continuation of government. So they will be in a bunker that is safe. They will have food, they will have power, they'll have running water, they'll have medical supplies, they will have all of this stuff so that they can keep the business of government going. And the president and vice president will be in a different place. And I presume the Supreme Court is in another, although I don't know that. So the premise of this, each member of Congress, and this is based on an actual bunker that I know existed in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, called the Greenbrier. And it was outed by the Washington Post in 1994, I think, as being there. So it went away and now it's open for tours. But I have it on good authority that there's another one elsewhere. And they can bring, it's the member of Congress and a senator plus one staffer, no family. So one could argue, I would argue, I mean, family's everything to me. So if I'm going to go into a bunker and I'm going to let my wife and family just deal with it, it just seems fundamentally flawed logic. But that's me. So what happens is Victoria Emerson is the representative for district in West Virginia, and she arrives. She's a single mom. Her husband was killed in battle. She's got 3 boys. One is away at like a military school, and then the 2 younger ones live with her. She shows up, and they say, "Well, no, you can't bring the kids." So she says, "Okay, I quit," and she walks off. And then ultimately, Victoria survives. It's a part of West Virginia, this bunker, and where Victoria is, there's no strategic value, so it doesn't take direct hits. In fact, there's a lot of people survive. And even in the war plans, hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people will die, but billions of people will live. There's a lot of folks. So what Victoria ends up doing is inadvertently, she doesn't want to lead anybody. She wants to reunite her family and just move on and survive. She's kind of a prepper. But she ends up getting sucked in because she's a natural leader, and people follow her. There are people in my life, I'm sure people in your life too, that are just like that. They might not have the stars or the stripes or whatever as the mantle of leadership, but people follow them. So, and that's who Victoria is. And the story takes place really in 2 parts. You've got the government center, which gets locked down, and then you have the people who are outside. Well, the government center, they have all the communication equipment, state of the art. Who's going to hear them? So you have government trying to do government stuff, and you have the people trying to survive, and the government really doesn't matter. All of a sudden, speed limits don't count, right? And go ahead.
Yeah, you have to mention there was an EMP as well. That's one reason why all the, everything electronic is fried.
Right, including vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Any vehicle that was built after the 70s, I don't know what the date is, but all modern vehicles are just rolling computers. So they're big paperweights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what's so fascinating about the series as well. And my wife especially, she's actually diving into both books because I wouldn't say we're preppers, but we have a good pantry,
okay,
and we have a good pantry, and as a matter of fact, the whole COVID thing. Yes, that. Hello, Dimitri. Thank you, Dimitri. That's the office cat.
Okay.
Decided to join me.
It's startling.
I didn't expect that either. But anyway, we're fascinated by these subjects, and she has read. Well, you mentioned Neville Shute's book,
On the Beach.
On the Beach, and 1 Second After. Teresa's read, and several others as well, including there was a YA novel about a comet that strikes the moon and it descends closer to Earth and causes all kinds of problems. So she's been reading your books, your 2 Vicki Emerson books. And what's fascinating is seeing how it plays out in both ways, both in the congressional side and both in Ortho, West Virginia, how she's having to deal with locals, getting things set up, and dealing with all the emotions involved. Was Was that book difficult to write? And I mean that in terms of you jump back and forth. I'm reading when I was reading through Blue Fire, especially, you're jumping back and forth from Hell Day and giving at the beginning of each chapter, what day that's occurring. Did you have trouble keeping track of all that?
I have, it's actually out there. I have a notebook where I thought I was going to be able to keep track of it. There are two storylines. The storyline that's taking place in the bunker actually plays out pretty much before any of the action that's taking place in Ortho, where Victoria is. But that's just it's not a pleasing way to write a book. Mm-hmm. So those two plots are interspersed, and I put timestamps on each of them. Was it difficult? It was difficult to proofread, to make sure that I had gotten it right. You take months to write these things, and words matter. And so that made it difficult to do. What really made Crimson Pheonix difficult to do, I wrote it in 2020. Mm-hmm. So I'm writing about the apocalypse during the apocalypse, we didn't know early on. I think my deadline was April for that. So early on, nobody knew how this was all going to play out. So that was a little creepy. But it also, the research into those books is actually, it's sort of fundamentally depressing, although the book is not depressing. I hope it's not. I hope the book is full of a lot of love and hope. There's also a lot of evil and nastiness, and good always wins in my books. But, we saw how people reacted just to get all the toilet paper and the hand sanitizer and all of that, much more than they would ever need. Imagine if it was diapers and heart medicine and insulin, and how feral would people turn? And how important is your diabetic neighbor when your diabetic daughter needs the insulin and he's got it? So that whole, I think we're animals, and I think we're smart animals, and we're good animals for the most part, but we can turn in a heartbeat to be very, I call it the concentric circles. There's that group that you will die for and kill for, and then there's everybody else, right?
Yeah. So, and there's always going to be a certain percentage that is like the 10% or so that they can't wait for the revolution. They want it. They want to be able to go out and break things. And for those of us who have even just read like the French Revolution, history of the French Revolution, you just say, you don't want this. Just trust me. No matter how much fun you think you're going to have, it is going to be terrible.
Well, and it gets down to the prepper community too, excuse me, which I respect. I get it. I'm building a house in West Virginia, and it will have features in it. So, I really do get it. But most of the prepper stuff is all about surviving, making sure that my family survives. Okay, I get that. Now what? What is the next step? Because society, whatever it's going to look like, has to rebuild. Yes. And that's what excited me about writing the story. The explosions and such happen, I think, in the first 100 pages of Crimson Pheonix. And then after that, it's all dealing with the aftermath, not with zombies and, all the awfulness. I don't think I've written a single death scene with, radiation sickness and all that, because that doesn't interest me. It's been done 1,000 times. I like the idea of people being knocked back to the Stone Age and having to make do. And I find that really engaging.
Well, especially in our society where you can have, you still have people who are blacksmiths. You still have tools and you still have knowledge around, but hopefully that knowledge is actually going to be in your neighborhood. Right. You're going to be able to find that close by, because that's when you realize back in medieval times that villages in England were about 3 miles apart. 3 miles apart? Can't remember. It was either 3 or 20, but essentially the distance that a man can walk in a day and then come back and be able to come back, that tells you a lot about what kind of organization you need, and that you do need somebody in charge, but you hope that it's going to be, somebody who's going to be reasonable and honorable, and not in Discworld Mad Lord Snapcase.
Well, and in the case of Victoria, there's also the decision, it just evolves this way, that she is not from Ortho, the town that has adopted her as more or less the mayor or the leader. She doesn't have a title. She doesn't want a title.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't bring any of the petty jealousies that come with small town life. She doesn't know that this guy had a past doing such and such and so and so. It doesn't matter to her because he can provide service, or she can provide service that the community needs. Mm-hmm. So she comes without prejudice and without prejudging anything. And the community realizes that we probably need that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, until situations happen, I think, with our boys, right, that makes it more of a problem, and that's what makes it such an exciting book to read. And I would definitely, I've read some of the first book, and I read Blue Fire, not realizing it's not coming out until February of next year. But there's an arc in there involving a soldier, and you'll know who it is. He's at the end of the story, and you really have to feel for somebody who finds themselves making the wrong choices. You did not choose wisely,
right?
And I've admired that very much. Putting that in. What was your process rebuilding the world after Hell Day? You're thinking about how to do it.
Honestly, winging it. One of the reasons it's set not in a city, it's a small town. I took it easy on myself. I put them near a river. There are some conveniences that actually you will find in places. My great grandfather had an old sawmill, a steam-powered sawmill. That's not how he used it, but with the belts and the pulleys, and fascinating place. And of course, it had been electrified by the time I saw it, and I was very young when I did. So I imagine this still existing. So you're still going to have power, or you're still going to have fire. You're still going to have water, and with a little bit of repair, there's a blacksmith. Actually, she's more of a, I guess it's a blacksmith, but it's more ornamental stuff than it is what she has to come and do now. So I just kind of. So what happens now? People start wandering into Ortho from other places. Everybody's walking. Some of them walking for weeks. Gangs are forming up that I don't spend a lot of time on. There's a lot of reference to them, but there's not a lot of time spent with them. And these people arrive exhausted and they have nothing. So now the town people of Ortho, do we give them our stuff? Do we share our insulin? And so these are I've just shared with you my process, and as articulately as I think it. Yeah. It's just kind of all over. Well, okay, if this happens and this happens, and now what?
Yeah. Yeah. Did you do any other reading on post-apocalyptic books? Because you just mentioned them.
Well, as a kid, Alas, Babylon, by
Pat
Frank. I thought that was fascinating. And I thought On the Beach was just depressing as hell, just awful, hopeless sort of thing. And I don't like zombies. I don't like, in fact, that's one of the problems we had in deciding what to call this series, because post-apocalyptic these days means zombies and monsters and, all of that. And there's none of that. The monsters are all human and real human. So I intentionally kind of avoided that because I didn't want to. It's such a narrow slice of literature that I may very well cross the line into what other people do. I don't know, and I didn't want to know. What I did read was a lot of blogs about preppers and about preparing for the apocalypse. And if you have, again, West Virginia, every house in West Virginia, in my experience, and I love West Virginia, I'm moving there. You got an arsenal and, hundreds, thousands of rounds of ammunition. Why? Because, they're shooters, and that's what they do. So they have the ability to defend themselves, and they have smart people who can use their hands. And then, oddly enough, then you have the people who, the lawyers and such from outside, the money handlers, the investment brokers and all of that, who are kind of useless now.
Yeah.
except if they learn how to hammer a nail, and it can be useful. So I find all of this just a lot of fun, and to tell the story with a lot of respect and a lot of love for the characters, but then also really hard decisions have to be made.
Yeah. How long of a series do you think you'll be able to do for Vicky? How many
At
books?
least one more. I think the third, I just signed a contract for the third, which will be called White Smoke. So I have Crimson Pheonix, Blue Fire, and White Smoke. And I've always seen those three parts of the story, but I'm also kind of fallen in love with the world that I'm creating. So if I get inspiration for more, they might come. And it all depends on, if they prove to be popular. If people like them, then I'm an entertainer. So I'd love to give them more.
That's great. That's great. I'm actually looking forward to seeing what you do with it next, because that's always, I'd hate to say the end of the world is always an evergreen subject.
Until it's not, right?
Until it's not. Are you reading anything now that you're done? Are you going to turn to books?
I just finished, Eric Larson's book on Churchill.
the Vial.
Splendid in the Vial.
Splendid in the Vial, yeah.
Which I found, well, first of all, the guy's brilliant. I don't understand how anybody does that level of research. But I thought that's really, really good. I didn't realize that the Battle of Britain started like 2 days after Winston Churchill became prime minister. Yikes.
That is, I've read the book as well, and I agree with you totally. I was a history major in college at one time and have read a lot, and I have never seen writing of that quality, that intimacy, and all based on actual research, because he had access to diaries, so he was able to do that. Yes, I highly recommend, especially that book, but I'm also delving into his other books as well. All right, so where can you be reached if people want to find out more about you and your books?
All things John Gilstrap, johngilstrap.com, John Gilstrap author on Facebook, author John Gilstrap on YouTube. I have a YouTube series that I call it A Writer's View of Writing and Publishing, which is kind of just an insider's view, short, 5-6 minute videos on, what does a movie deal look like, or, kind of that peek behind the curtain sort of thing. I am at John Gilstrap 201, I think, on Twitter, but in all fairness, I don't get Twitter. I have a Twitter handle. I don't know how to use it, I guess. So, but Facebook is probably the best way to find me, John Gilstrap author.
Okay, and I would also recommend that readers go ahead and visit John Gilstrap's website at johngilstrap.com. He has a series of essays under a tab, and they are brilliant. They're affecting and moving, particularly A Moment That Haunts Forever, which is a little grisly, but it's from John's days as an EMT. And I find it fascinating that for someone who says essentially looks like Jason Alexander, that you have quite a lot of stuff in your head. If you don't mind. I love him as well, but let's face it, I wouldn't mistake you for a member of Delta Force, but at the same time, you have done a lot.
This goes back probably 2000, maybe 1999, 2000. I was writing a film for Warner Brothers, and I was in an office there on the lot. So you go and eat at the cafeteria. That's not what they call it. Commissary. Eat at the commissary. And you go walking through the New York set and all this. It's pretty cool. And there was this one tram, there's the multi-car trams of tourists, and somebody yelled, "There's George Costanza." And, if it's just not who you want to be when you're when you're that age, but it's, what can I say?
Yes, well, we all tend to reject our roles, and we kind of accommodate ourselves to them eventually, because what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
Even Leonard Nimoy said, "Okay, I'm Spock, whatever." It works. Well, John, thank you so much for talking today. I've got more questions, but we might as well save them, and maybe we'll get a chance to get together again and talk further.
I'd love that.
Absolutely a pleasure. Thank you very much. This is Bill Peschel, and this is Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents, a conversation with John Gilstrap. And I hope that your favorite book is your next book. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. The Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents podcast is sponsored by the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. The store is open with limited hours, plus we accept appointments and offer a drive-by service. The store will also ship books to your home, including those from the Peschel Press Mystery line, including our annotated editions of novels by Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers. To learn more, visit the store at www.mysterybooksonline.com. And thank you for listening.